you said you would be my wing woman, which reminds me that Saturday was Top Gun Day. Did you remember to celebrate?
I did not.
Top Gun Day.
Did you?
I mean, how do you celebrate Top Gun Day? I sang to myself and I enjoyed. What is this? What is the Top Gun? You've lost that loving feeling. I'll save the viewers the pain of listening to me sing that. I did sing that song to myself. This is Lindy Kaiser with Clearance Jobs, Jill Hamilton with Clearance Jobs. We're doing an Ask Me Anything edition of LinkedIn Live, whatever. Hello, LinkedIn user. Thank you, Damon, Nader. Appreciate all of the hellos. It lets us know that you're there. If you have questions about the security clearance process, Jill and I would be happy to answer them. You fly a jet if on Top Gun Day. For the record, hey, if you're watching this, U.S. Navy, send me on a fly along. They have those, right? Do they call them fly alongs? It's probably not the name. Jill and I will cover it. We will get on a plane. That would be a fantastic coverage for Top Gun Day next year. I'm going to demand a flight, whoever you just commented that we should fly for Top Gun Day. If you can't fly, you can just watch the movies, which are also delightful. Security clearance topics have been in the news. If you've been following Clearance Jobs, we've talked a ton about the legislation. Jill, I feel like I'm the only one that cares about that legislation. People on LinkedIn are probably ready for me to stop talking about the Senate proposals, but brace yourselves, people. Desk audits are coming. DHS also announced, I saw that in the news this week, that they were going to be auditing their cleared personnel. So if you currently have a security clearance, you may have your employer asking you if you still need your security clearance. And again, I think desk audits are around the corner. So that was in the news. I'm pushing back against that. We've done desk audits before. The one thing I love about this job is that I basically just write the same article. I can just update it once every 10 years when the government goes back to doing the same thing it did. So they did desk audits back in like 2012, right? And now they're doing them again. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the desk audit process or the post Teixeira?
I think it's well, I think that it's hard when everything, a lot of things are reactive. It'd be much better if it was, an organized, like deep dive into everything instead of, we got to plug the holes. We got to figure out this problem came up. We got to hit that down. And instead of just actually looking at it, which I think, they are trying to, when they've overhauled a lot of the different things about the process, and some of it just comes back to policy and changing policy. You don't want to change policy in a reactive mode. You want to take in current events, of course, but reactive mode doesn't actually help us in the long term. And I think when it comes to do you need a security clearance? When I think of different jobs too that I've done over the years, sure, I could have done a lot of my job without it, but then when I went to go have to get on site at the government, I actually still needed that security clearance. So how do you qualify what's going to be in or out, whether or not your position actually needs it or not? Who's making that decision process? That I would be wondering that.
Well, that's a big piece because it's all the eligible versus in-access population, which the government already tracks those two data sets. They already know who is eligible and who is in access. What Congress is asking for is an audit of the whole eligible population and drawing down the eligible population, which I think is the wrong way to do it, because that gives you your supply demand elasticity, which, working in government contracting, you need folks maybe who aren't on site on a project today, but that you can put on site on a project. And then for me, when it comes down to vetting, I mean, Charlie Phelan, I've asked to chat with him about this later because he has my favorite. He was like, do you want somebody that's been vetted further or somebody that's been vetted less? What are you really asking for here? And when you're looking at reducing the number of folks, it gets into a lot of that. We've had a lot of questions. None of them are about the legislation. People are like, we want to know about our clearances today. Questions about clearance processing times, which we have an article on the news site out about that now. We're looking at 80 to 100 days, 130 days for a top secret security clearance. We have seen a slight uptick on those security clearance processing times. So if that's something you're following, that's another reason that I kind of push back on cutting the cleared population today at a time when we're seeing our security clearance timelines kind of go up a little bit. We've had several questions about clearance upgrades. Hey, I have a secret clearance. How do I get a TS clearance? Hey, I don't have a clearance. How do I get a clearance? That all comes down to an employer sponsoring you. And I will say again, especially in this market, you're not going to have an employer say, hey, you don't need a TS clearance. Let's just give you one for fun. And we've never had that the case because of the money and the time. So I think the funny thing is like Congress thinks that like we're vetting people like writ large who don't need it. That's not the case. It's because there is a contract requirement or a military requirement. I mean, the irony is too, is like with the Teixeira case, and that was somebody in the service. You're like, are you going to start stripping security clearances from service members? That seems like a really bad idea. Like we're going to allow you to deploy, but we are not going to give you some form of security clearance. I mean, even just having a basic secret security clearance eligibility, again, having that eligibility is a good thing. What people have access to is, a different story altogether. Somebody asks how to know if they're eligible. I would say reading articles at clearance jobs. Like, do you have any tips for folks who are like considering this process? Like, hey, how do I decide if a cleared career is for me?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is to figure out if you actually like the jobs that are out there. So start there. See if there's a job that like what you're doing, you actually would want to do within national security. I think the goal is national security. So hopefully that is your goal for US national security. So that's another question for yourself. And then look through the adjudicative guidelines and see what could be an issue. If you really think there could be some major hurdles, it wouldn't hurt to just have a preliminary discussion with either somebody who's lawyerly minded or somebody who is an actual security clearance lawyer, just to say, what do you think the process might be? Because sometimes it's helpful to go in eyes wide open to know what you're going to do. I'd also say maybe start low, go in for like a lower clearance level where they're not going to go back as many years, see what that looks like. Make through that process and then consider too if you want to go for something that requires a higher security clearance. That's probably what I would say.
Yeah, and we've had questions about like verifying if you do have a security clearance. We have articles about that over at the news site too. So if you actually don't know if you have a clearance, which can be the case, again, especially if you separated from the military, if you left a cleared position, you're wondering about the status. We do get a decent number of questions about that, even under continuous vetting. And I've seen a few threads around continuous vetting in there. 100% of the cleared population is enrolled in some form of continuous vetting solution today. So we do have continuous vetting out there. If you are under continuous vetting, they're still saying you have that 2-year window from when you leave a position to move back into a position. So if you're wondering the status of your clearance, again, it should remain quote unquote current if it's been within 2 years. But if you've been out or you're just wondering about the status, there are methods you can do, a typical government process of submitting some information, and they will give you your clearance status. The easiest thing to do is to talk to your former employer and ask them, or ask your former security officer, or whoever was in charge of your clearance when you were in the military. Asking them that question is going to be the fastest method, but there are also paper trail methods you can do to find out your own clearance status. If you're wondering, I mean, a ton of questions coming in just again about job status, remote work. I don't know. Do you want to chime in on that one? Cleared remote work, Jill? I know we've written about that at Clearance Jobs.
Yeah, we've highlighted a number of companies that have remote opportunities out there. So I think definitely just searching either the news site on remote jobs or remote work. You can also look on our site for jobs that specifically say remote. You can just use that as one of your filters. So those options are out there. Usually just depends upon the role. Ones that say on site with the client, that's probably not going to be remote. That's the reality. But I did want to. We had one commenter, William Gallant. He had 2 different comments that I thought was interesting. One, the first one was on your original topic. When something in like the news happens, he said, "I had a TSSCI." It keeps moving on me. Then the big spy case, John Walker downgraded to secret. So like it does happen where like people get really antsy. He had a second question which I thought was really relevant, and we've talked about this before. Is like where you've written a lot. You've written a lot on everything, but it was his other comments kind of disappeared in another thread. But it was like, what's the difference between when a company basically wants to have you show up with a clearance versus saying that they're going to willing to help you get one, which either they're willing to sponsor or you already need to have it in order to have the job.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, you might have thoughts on this, but like, it's really just the difference of whether a company is willing to go through that process with you and wait that time out for you to obtain a security clearance, and they just want to hire somebody able to step into the job
Yeah.
tomorrow with the right
It
security
all
clearance.
comes down to the contract requirements, and that's what I always say. Like, it's easy to blame the
True.
contractor for this, and maybe sometimes they do need to be blamed for something. I don't know. I'm always happy to blame somebody. That's just, it needs to happen. But in general, it's because their contract has a requirement that says, "Hey, we need our folks to be cleared already," or they have the bandwidth or the bench or the capital to sponsor through that process. But that's sort of thing. The questions about, "Hey, am I eligible for a security clearance?" That's a good existential question to ask yourself prior to applying. It's good faith on the part of an employer. And like you said, the best way to get a clear job is to have an understanding of if you want the job itself. Is that work that you want to do? And does that require clearance? Nobody wants a clearance. I mean, maybe somebody does, some spy out there on this thread, but no, nobody wants a clearance just to have a clearance. You want it because you want to support national security and you have that function. And the clearance is the component that goes along with doing that work and having that job. Somebody asked about cost of clearances. I mean, that is paid for by the government, and that's a reason why they are not clearing people who don't need a clearance. I think it also makes the case, though, for why we don't want to just drop a bunch of clearance eligible people out of the population and say, "Hey, we're just going to do, we have the money and the time to do new clearances for everybody." I don't necessarily see that being the case. And there are costs for employers in terms of, like you said, keeping people on the bench and what the time it takes. I was on a call with NSA and they talked about their onboarding process. I think there's something to be said. Let's ask existential questions. So about having, what is your bench time look like, and how can you find viable employment while waiting in the process? I think there's a good use case for that. And I know you've talked about 1099 employment. We do have some of those options on the site, but I don't think it's terrible to look for part-time, options or part-time opportunities as you're trying to get onboarded with an IC agency or with another employer that might have a bigger lead time in terms of their hiring and onboarding. Because it's not sometimes as simple as just applying and check, I'm immediately on the job. Do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah. No, I think that's part of the real issue with getting talent into national security is the onboarding time. You might be able to find a willing candidate, but you also have to have candidates who are willing to wait if need be. So within the federal government, sometimes that's a little bit easier where they have other work that you could be, as long as you have access to the building. It's just a clunkier process of having to sign in every day. It's not very streamlined. But if there's other work that you can be doing, but most companies don't, you don't want somebody to have to sit there until your clearance comes through, just almost doing nothing, and have that supported in overhead, because you can't charge that to a contract. I'm sure people do, but then there's time card fraud, which the government will get you on at some point.
Yeah.
So, and then you just burn up your contract hours too. So it's a lose-lose situation for everybody. So there is something about being able to have people on the bench and giving them viable work. And some companies just have multiple contracts that they can put you on until your clearance comes through. But I do think, like you said, 1099 work is another viable option. If they can't hire you until your clearance is in hand, then having some either freelance work or some other part-time option. You just have to make sure that information gets also on your SF-86 as updated employment information. Otherwise, that could come back to bite you potentially, depending upon what your part-time work was.
So many stipulations. Yes.
We've written about that too.
Well, and there's questions too about the TS to, how to get a clearance upgrade. Again, we talked about that, but the clearance upgrade process is going to be based on a requirement. So again, an employer is not just going to upgrade you to a TS because they want you to have a TS. It's going to be because there is a billet or a job position that requires that. Also, somebody, talk about working their way through the wickets. There is some, element where it might be easier to get your foot in the door with a certain level of clearance. But I also think there's a lot of positions that will start you at a TS or want you to TS SCI if you're willing. So again, it's all about looking for the position, looking for the employer, and doing some due diligence. I've had a few questions about how to get your foot in the door. Networking is really key. I do think, and I know we kind of look at national security as not being, the most networking centric employment space, but I do think there is a heavy networking component. Getting to know folks, reaching out to recruiters. I know I see a ton of recruiters in this thread posting about positions. So just getting to know employers and really establishing some connections can absolutely help with that onboarding process. If you have an interest in the skill set, doing a lot of, again, doing employer research is a really important thing. Do you have any thoughts on that? Getting your foot in the door?
I think the other thing too is look at what agencies are near you and what type of clearances they typically require. And that can help make your decision on whether it's really worth it to go for a top secret or to stay with a secret. I've talked to a lot of people, there was, we've done some of our career events, and I remember one person was like, yes, I'd really like to work here on site at Fort Meade. But I'm still at a secret level in cybersecurity. Like, yeah, there probably are positions. My best advice is accept the first one you can with your clearance level, and then start to make your connections. And I mean, it even goes, when you say networking, it's also networking within your own company as well. Make those different connections. It's super hard sometimes for people who are on site with the client to keep making the connections back to the office with their coworkers there, but that's actually a really important thing to do, to make sure you're checking in with people, you're having those conversations, they know where you exist. So if your contract should end, you might, it's a lot easier to land somewhere else if you've already been making those networking connections internally. It's hard to do.
Well, and there is something to say, take the opportunity that you can get today and know that it can segue to other things. We've had a few questions in here about reciprocity. That is a component. Like there are, if you have somebody asked about Department of Energy clearance, yes, there are. They are supposed to recognize a DOE clearance, the same level moving into DOD. And especially for DOD touts a 1-day reciprocity number now. So if you're looking to move from another agency into DOD, you should, especially DOE, IC, anywhere, you're gonna find a really easy process getting into the DOD. Now, between the IC agencies, maybe not so much. They're not publishing their reciprocity.
There's just more factors.
There's just different vetting that they have, like the polygraph,
and suitability.
A lot more polygraph requirements across the IC. So it's not going to necessarily be as fast, but it does get your foot in the door. It is taking a chance on a known entity, because the depth of the investigation is deeper, but the criteria are the same. So that's what we talk about a ton. A lot of folks will be like, hey, I got a secret. Can I get a TS? Well, it depends. Like, did you lie when you got the secret, or were you 100% truthful? Ask yourself that question first. But if you were honest, your chances of getting on there, they're just going to dig a little deeper. So if there aren't any bodies buried when they get that shovel out, you got a good chance, people. Go for it. But if there's something buried there, then you might want to stay at the secret level. Yeah. Otherwise, the criteria are the same. They're not going to be looking. They're looking deeper into the same things. They're not looking for new bad things about you. They're also not looking for bad things. The denial rate and revocation rate on security clearance is incredibly low. We talk about that a ton too. So if you have interest in this, if you're one of those people saying, hey, I want to work in national security, come on in, the water's fine. I promise you that we would end sort of on time, Jill, but any last thoughts?
Well, my last thought is I just find it super interesting that right now the pushback is, do we have too many clearances? We need to clear everything out. Or when an issue does pop up with one individual, people are like, where was the vetting on this? Who approved this? And then, when somebody loses a clearance for an issue, people are like, man, who are they going to let in? It's almost like a lose-lose situation where no matter what way the pendulum swings, people are whining about the overall process. Yes. Because that's what we do.
We complain. Yeah. I mean, you're getting me on my soapbox, Jill. I've been talking to myself about this for the past week. There are not too many people with security clearance. Talk to anybody trying to get in on this process. Oh, my computer. Is it still awake? Yeah. You just disappeared for a second. I was getting so excited about it that the whole screen disappeared. I was like, NSA is watching this one. They're like, she's got to shut her down. No, I don't think there's too many people with security clearance. I don't think vetting is the problem. I will say this again, it is we can't get to zero risk. We're trying to get to zero risk with IMBIS. May the odds be ever in their favor. But you don't get to zero risk when it comes to a security vetting scenario, because we're humans and humans are humans. Mm-hmm. So I think, it's good to look at the process. Yeah. I say looking at the vetting process right now is not looking at the right spot. It's looking at need to know, overclassification, which is what they're looking at, but not necessarily attacking the vetting process and attacking the people behind it too. Because I think we want more people working in national security, not fewer. Come on in.
There you go.
Boom. Thank you for joining us for this very frantic, very fast, very distracted LinkedIn Live. Ask us anything. We are with Clearance Jobs and we are here to help. So we want to help you with your cleared career. Definitely check out clearancejobs.com. Pretty much every topic that has come through on the chat, we do have a news article about. So if you're like, hey, these schmucks did not answer my question, well, let's go to news.clearancejobs.com, and Jill or I or Katie who's on the chat, we've already written about it. So I know Katie's on here replying to some of these, but check out our news site, search for the opportunities that are there. We would love to help you. And if you have questions, we're very accessible. You can find us. You can message us here on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, the social media platform of your choice. And we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Jill. Happy belated Top Gun Day.